So you've already referenced the network
Yeah.
several times in their involvement. I'm curious as to how involved the network is in the writer's room and in the story.
Yeah, and it varies from network to network. And I'm basically a contractor. People are hiring me to do the show that they want on their network. It's their right. I'm not at the level yet. I've never worked on a show where they said, do whatever you want. And I'm somewhat curious about what I would create still as an artist. Until you go back to the musicals and plays that I wrote, I haven't had full control over my art, which is a whole separate line about being a television writer. I'm basically a writer for hire who, I write original pilots and I pitch shows that are my own. But when I get hired, they want a show called Good Witch. This is the audience. This is what kind of show we want, how much conflict is going to be in it. This is what we want to happen with the characters. This is how much arguing can go on. This is how much music's going to be in it. This is the pace we want. So I have to work within those rules. By the way, I don't mind working in those rules. Even Michelangelo generally was working within a frame. So I just compared myself to Michelangelo.
Look at you.
A lot of times he didn't because he's more of a sculptor. But it doesn't bother me to say, this is the frame I have. These are the rules that I have and what kind of language I can use, even in images. I hear from writers that say, well, the rules are different on HBO than they are on ABC for language. Yeah, okay, so do the best show you can within those rules.
Yeah.
On a show like 70s Show, the network was hardly demanding at all. I came on season 2, and it was kind of already hit. By season 3 or 4, they were still coming to run-throughs. They were still giving notes on stories. And they were still giving notes on edits, but it wasn't taking a lot of time. We didn't have to really address it too much.
Sure.
First season of Buffy, we had a lot of involvement with the network. We're still kind of figuring out what the show was. So we wrote a script or two that completely changed, that they threw out because they didn't want Buffy and the gang working at a retirement center with old people. So we changed it to a show about a hospital and kind of used some of the old story. And that came kind of last minute. On a show like Good Witch, they were very involved and really had some specific demands at Hallmark. So that was the biggest challenge, I think, to work with because I wasn't always trying to take the show in a different direction. I was just kind of trying to tweak some of the stuff around the edges and give it some more energy, make it funnier, kind of deepen some of the relationships, do more stuff with teenagers. All of which they liked. That's how I got the job. I said, this is what I want to do. But they would generally, if I was going off track a little bit, they'd want to push it back. So, and the problem with some networks that vary, sometimes the notes don't come in till, the day before. I mean, there were moments on some shows where I was running down to the set, telling the production coordinator to call the set and tell them to stop shooting because I had just gotten notes on a scene that we were shooting at that moment. So I had to change some of those lines. That gets into what I said earlier about how much time do you have.
Fast. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Sometimes you have to turn it around completely. Sometimes, I was talking about a story where these two characters say, I love you for the first time. I wanted to do another story. Since that story ended with two characters saying, I love you, I wanted to do another story where a woman's ex-boyfriend shows up, or a guy that she's dated like twice shows up, and says, I came here to tell you I love you. And that's in the teaser. So I wanted to kind of do if it's one episode's ending with, I love you, I want to start the other story with, I love you. And we broke that entire story and he wanted her to go to Paris with her. And the movie that these other two characters were talking about happened to take place in Paris. So we had some synergy there. And then after the second draft, the network decided they didn't want that story where this character shows up and says, I love you. So I had to pull that story out, rejigger everything. So that's frustrating because I thought there was a elegance to how those two stories were told that we had put a lot of effort into, parallel scenes and balance and all. So I've actually tried to figure out a way to get this into classes and help people to understand that this is what they're going to be doing. And by the way, I had the benefit of watching other writers fight with the network. And in fact, some of them got fired fighting with the network because they wouldn't do what the network wanted. And I realized early on, you got to do what the network wants. You can argue with them, but eventually they're the owner of the house. And if they say paint it green and you know it's going to look ugly when it's painted green, you still got to paint it green because that's your job as a television writer. It's different than when you're writing spec scripts. And at a certain point, you'll have more say. You'll be able to make your case as a showrunner, but generally you have to do what they say. And I've worked on shows where they just throw out stories that I thought were the best stories we developed, change things, pull out things. And I'm not saying everybody should practice this, but if I were teaching a class on writing, I think one of the things I would do is have them write a scene or an act of a script, and then I'd come up with some of the worst notes possible, but I wouldn't tell them I know they're bad. I would just come up with some of the worst notes and say, all right, here's what I want you to do. I had written a pilot for a network, and it was about these teenagers who were going to be the first mission to Mars, the first manned mission to Mars in like 15 years. And they had chosen the teenagers now and were training them for the mission that happens in 15 years. So it happened on the Earth, and it was all kind of the training missions, and they go out in the world and do and blah, 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 solve crimes, whatever. And the network said, we really like this script. Could it be in space? They literally said to me, could it be in space? Because they liked the characters, and they wanted, so, and I went, okay. And then I rewrote the story and took the same characters, and now they work at it. And then it became called The Center of the Universe. It was basically Cheers in Space about teenagers who work at like a rest stop and Circle K for aliens who are crossing the universe. So it worked, and that script has actually gotten me some other work. But that's the kind of stuff that the network does. So it's not always easy, but again, you got to play well with others.
Yeah.
I was accused by a network of being snarky. yeah, I can get snarky. But you know what? I'm still going to do what they say.
Yeah.
So I think with that network, I didn't realize my snarkiness was getting in the way. So they actually thought I wasn't taking their notes, even though I was. And that's the other thing. You got to figure out creative ways to take their notes, figure out really what are they asking for. Sometimes, I worked with one executive who was really great. And I just said, look, if you don't like the story, just say you don't like it. You don't have to come up with these false reasons or try to talk around it. Just tell me you don't like the story, and then I'll do something else. Because I know if you don't like the story, I'm not going to win this argument.
Yeah.
And that's something you can't really prepare for as a younger writer starting out. But just know that eventually, you're not the auteur. Television, you're a writer for hire. Film is the same way. At a certain point, maybe you get to do everything. This is why, like independent filmmakers who get to do what they want because they're their own studio, sometimes have a difficulty transitioning to this is what the studio wants. So, come up with creative ways to address notes, figure out what it's really about. But they're the ones paying the bills. So you got to do what they ask for.
Yeah.